If you enjoy this video, please consider giving a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you have any ideas for future videos, share them in the comments section below. This original bedtime story is made possible thanks to Slumberland patrons. If you would like to support this channel, you can find Patreon details in the description and on my channel homepage. So just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to comfortably drift asleep, I'm just going to tell this sleep story in the background. And I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my voice or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And this is a story about a young dog called Rosie. And Rosie is out one day walking with her human friend. And they're heading down to the nearby park. And as they walk down towards that park, so Rosie can follow different scent trails, noticing different and unusual smells. Following one scent, exploring that for a while. Before then, changing directions and following another scent, and occasionally stopping to explore a scent in a little more detail. And Rosie's world is an incredibly rich, scent-filled world. And as Rosie and her human approach the park, so she can notice the smells of the different flowers emanating gently from the park. And they head into that park through a black steel gate. And Rosie instantly runs off across the grass, bounding around, rolling on the grass, running into some longer grass and rolling in that, and rubbing some of those scents that she really likes onto her fur. She likes the way that when she does that, those scents hang around and stick with her for a while. And her human is just walking along at a leisurely pace, taking deep breaths, enjoying being outside, just enjoying relaxing, walking through this park, while Rosie runs around and plays and explores the park. And she has been to this park many times before, but each time she finds new things to explore that she hadn't seen before. She finds it interesting how the park changes across the year. That when she first came to this park, there wasn't much green. It was mainly sticks, and the trees were bare, and everything was brown, and it was cold, and the ground was hard. And then as she continued coming to the park, first there were some small little delicate flowers popping up near the trees. And then there was even more flowers, and the trees started growing tiny leaves. And then one time when she visited, there was insects and butterflies, and the sounds of more birds, more cheery bird sounds. In each visit to the park she has discovered more and more going on here. And now even the short grass is longer than it was, and the long grass is very long. And where there was just mud, there are now densely packed flowers. And while Rosie explores, her human finds a bench and sits down on a bench, shaded comfortably by the shadow of a tall tree. And Rosie explores the edge of the park, explores around the flowers, jumps over some of the flowers to explore behind those flowers and into the trees a little way. And she knows that her human is comfortable with her doing this, that they always seem so relaxed, and they're comfortable because there's a fence that goes around the outside of the park, so they know that Rosie is here within the park, even if they lose sight of her. And today, while Rosie is exploring the park, she notices a really unusual smell. And she's had a faint whiff of this smell before, but she's never tracked down what it is. And so she follows that scent, weaving between trees, heading into the coolness and the calmness of the wooded area of this park, away from that open green area, noticing the quietening down of the sounds around her, following that scent, just hearing the gentle steps that she takes as she walks through this wooded area. And after a while, she hears a slight squeaking sound. And so she heads cautiously and curiously towards that squeaking sound. And as she pokes her head into a tiny bush at the base of a tree, she sees a small little animal. And that little kitten looks up at Rosie, making a few little squeaking sounds and jerky movements, trying to stand and move, and buffs its head against Rosie's wet nose. And Rosie's curious about this little creature. Rosie pulls her head out of the bush and looks around, and she can't smell any other animal like this animal. And as she's looking around, she hears a twinkling, sparkling sound. And then, almost as if it's come out of the tree trunk, through the tree trunk, she sees some sparkling light that's incredibly bright. And as that sparkling light lowers down towards her, the brightness of the light begins to dim, and she notices what looks like a small person with wings. And this fairy hovers near to Rosie and says, "I need your help. The mum cat of this kitten has entered the land of the fairies, and the kitten needs the mum, and the mum can't find her way out from the land of the fairies and is lost in that land. And as a fairy, I can find my way out. Using magic, we come and go through magical portals that have us move from one realm to another. But we can't take someone else through that portal. We can just synchronize so that we pass through the portal ourselves. And that mum cat can't find their way back. They accidentally stumbled into some entrance somewhere that led to our land. And I was just coming back here to check on the kitten because the cat has asked for my help. And I said that I don't know what I could do to help, but I'd make sure their kitten's okay while we find out how to find the entrance that they passed through and find a way for them to come back. And Rosie discovers that she can communicate back with this fairy. She can understand the fairy, and when she goes to speak, the fairy understands her back. And she asks what she could possibly do to help. And the fairy says that you could carry the kitten, and you could use your sense of smell, see if there's a strange smell that you can't identify, that perhaps isn't of this world, and try and find the way through to the land of the fairies. And once you're through to that land, you can take the kitten to the mum, and then together the three of you can find your way back out. And the mum can make sure that the kitten's okay. And so Rosie agrees to help and starts to take some big sniffs of the air, moving her head around. And she pinpoints the faintest of smells that she knows she's not encountered here before. And she knows that it's not this kitten. And so she carefully picks up the kitten with her mouth, and the kitten relaxes and hangs there. And she follows that scent. And she's never encountered a cat before, and this is the first time she's encountered a kitten. And she weaves around the trees until eventually she sees what looks like a disturbance on the ground, like there was something here, but now it isn't. And she smells around, trying to identify what should be here and where that smell is coming from, and realizes it's just a residual smell, that it's a smell of something that was here, not of something that is here. And the fairy asks, "What is it? What have you discovered?" And Rosie puts down the kitten gently and says that the smell that I was smelling came from here, but whatever it was isn't here now. But I think that this might be where the cat walked through into your land. And the fairy suddenly realizes what had happened. That perhaps the pixies had created a portal that, unlike the fairies, when they travel, they maneuver just themselves through from one realm to another, almost like just sliding from a realm to a realm. Whereas the pixies build up energy And then in a flash of light, a portal opens. They appear almost like a bubble opening around them. And then as that bubble bursts, the portal slowly closes again, and the pixies are in the earthly realm. And then when they travel back, they concentrate. They create a ball of energy that surrounds them, that spreads out further and further from them, that then creates a rift across the realms, and as it bursts, they're back in their original realm. And as it slowly closes, so the portal between the two realms closes. And the fairy realizes that the cat must have walked just at that moment through a pixie's portal from one realm to another. Because as the portal's fading, it doesn't look like anything. The light fades, and the portal remains just for a moment, but you would only notice the portal's there if you entered it. And so they now know what happened. But the difficulty was trying to find a pixie to open a portal. The fairy said she'll try and head back to her land and see if she can find a pixie to open a portal to this location. And that'll explain why the cat couldn't find their way back, because their way there didn't exist anymore. And in a twinkling flash of light, that fairy disappeared back, as if into a tree, passing back into their own realm, back into the land of those fairies. And the dog just waited and waited while that little kitten squeaked and squeaked and tried to move around, and seemed to be moving in such a way that the dog realized this little kitten was wanting to suckle, was wanting some food. And so Rosie knew that she had to get this kitten to its mum. And while sitting waiting, she could hear the rustling leaves overhead as the wind blew such a gentle breeze. And then all of a sudden, she had a strong smell that smelt like that residual trail that she just followed. But this smell was much stronger, so she picked up the kitten and headed in the direction of the smell. And she followed that smell as it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And she couldn't see anything, but the smell just continued to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then suddenly, the smell started getting weaker. And unknown to her, she had just walked through a pixie's portal. And she was now in the land of the fairies. And yet this land, at least here, among the trees, looked identical to where she had just come from. And so if it wasn't for the change in smell, she wouldn't have noticed that she was somewhere different. And then she saw that fairy come down, sparkling with light, and she could smell a stronger smell, a bit like the kitten. And that stronger smell seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. And the fairy said that they'd found a pixie that had opened the portal. But the dog couldn't see this pixie, and the fairy said that pixies are only visible to human children. That they're not visible to animals, they're not visible to adult humans. And then Rosie saw the cat dashing over. She put down the kitten, took a few steps back. The cat ran over to the kitten, licked the kitten, and petted the kitten. And the kitten nuzzled its way in to have a drink of milk, and the cat laid down gently on its side, purring and licking the kitten while the kitten drank the milk. And the fairy said that it might be best for the cat and the kitten to take a little while before they leave here and head back out of this realm. So for now, why not come back to where we live? And Rosie was curious with the smells here, and excited at the thought of being able to explore these new smells. And now they knew how they were going to get back. But Rosie also knew that she couldn't be too long, because her human friend would end up looking for her. So she had to be back before her human friend would start calling for her. And she followed the fairy, and the fairy led Rosie to some tall trees, and at the base of the tall trees were large mushroom houses. Some of the mushrooms were on mounds. Some of the mushrooms were sticking out of the trees. Some were just growing in the grass. And each one was a house that looked lived in, and some fairies came out of some of those houses, and some children fairies came out to see this dog. They've never seen a dog before. And the children fairies hadn't got their wings yet, so they ran over to the dog. They started petting at its legs, feeling the fur, grabbing chunks of the fur and rubbing their faces on it, talking with excited, squeaky voices. And then some of the adult fairies ushered the children along so that Rosie could continue following and exploring. And Rosie was shown around the village, shown where the fairies live. And Rosie couldn't climb up into the trees, but looked up at the houses that were up in the trees, and saw that these trees were full of different fairy houses, with all these mushrooms of different kinds. And then, after a very short while, Rosie said that it was time for her to head back. And so the fairy went back with Rosie to the cat and the kitten. The cat picked up the kitten, and Rosie and the cat looked at each other, and then looked forward. And then in a flash, the fairy said there's now a portal in front of you, created by a pixie. So if you just walk through that portal, just walk forward, you'll find yourself back in your normal realm. And so they walked forward. And the cat and the kitten and Rosie headed back to where the kitten had been found. The cat tucked the kitten back down, came over to Rosie as if to thank Rosie, rubbing up almost on tiptoes against the side of Rosie, and purring before heading back to the kitten. And Rosie could hear her human friend calling, so she ran out of the woodland, jumped the plants, and ran across the grass, and really wished that she could tell her human friend about her experience. But as she excitedly tried to tell her human friend, all the human saw was Rosie spinning around, jumping up and down and barking and wagging her tongue and shaking her tail. And the human laughed and said, "You're very excitable," and leant down. Rosie came up, rested her head on the human's knee, while the human rubbed and stroked both sides of Rosie, before together they headed out of the park and headed back home. And once back home, Rosie spent some time in the garden enjoying the sun, while her human carried on with other bits and pieces. And then as evening approached, her human friend settled down, reading a book, sitting on the sofa. Rosie climbed up on the sofa, rested her head onto the human's lap. The human put an arm around Rosie, and with one hand was just gently stroking Rosie as Rosie began to drift and float asleep, while the human read that book. And Rosie drifted into the most pleasant dreams about her experiences from the day, curious whether she would ever meet that cat and kitten again, or whether she would ever meet a fairy again, and what pixies look like. She hoped that one day maybe she would encounter a child and be able to figure out from that child what a pixie looks like. And resting there, being stroked so softly and gently, she drifted and floated so peacefully and so comfortably, relaxed asleep.